There you go.
All right. Hi, everyone. So today we are here with Matt Mendez. We're going to be talking about his new book coming out soon called The Brocards. So thank you again for being here with me today. Really, really excited to talk about this.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. All right. So just starting out, reading Barely Missing Everything and then The Brocards right after that was a really cool experience. And something I was wondering was Barely Missing Everything is definitely a complete story on its own. And so I wondered what sparked you to come back to these characters and revisit them for the Brocards.
So when Barely Missing Everything was over, like you said, it's this really kind of complete novel, and Juan's story is, tragic and finite, and it seems like a place where his story is definitely over, and it seems like there's no more story to tell.
Mm-hmm.
And I definitely could have left it there. It was such a heavy story to write.
Mm-hmm.
And part of me just really wanted to, not carry on with that story. But there's a character in that book that isn't a point of view character who I just found to be really funny and whose story I thought just had so much life in it, and that was just Danny.
Mm-hmm.
He was one of the three boys in that story who was just, to me, just this kind of underexplored character in Barely Missing Everything. He was funny and smart and sarcastic, and he had this relationship with his father that was just off page, that I could just,
Mm-hmm.
there was just so much kind of tension there. He was in a private school. He was away from his best friends. He'd been suspended in high school or expelled from high school, and he was in this different world from his two best friends, from Juan and JD. And there was so much story from him, and I was just drawn to that character because he was so apart from Juan and JD and Barely Missing Everything, but it's such still a part of his friend group, and he was still hanging out with them, and he had this binary life, this life that his father was creating for him, and then his life with his two best friends, and he was just in this middle world, and you could tell his future was pulling in this different direction. And I just was coming back to Danny's story, and so to me, that was the story I really wanted to explore, and wanted to write Danny's story and then the Sarge's story as well. So interested in his father and this world that his father was trying to create for him. And to me, there was this tension between the Sarge and Danny that just was calling back to me, and I wanted to write that novel.
Yeah, I really I love how you said that you felt drawn to Danny in that way because when I was reading Barely Missing Everything, I found him to be a really great inclusion to that story. But it's definitely true that there was more to see there with him, and I think it's cool that you listened to that, right? And you followed that because reading the Brocarts, I felt like I was getting a much more fleshed out image, and that was really cool. Um, what you said too about the Sarge and diving more into his relationship with Danny and his own childhood, that was one of my favorite things about the Brocarts, and one of my favorite things about Barely Missing Everything was the inclusion of Fabi's perspective, because we don't often get adult perspectives like that in books that are focusing on younger people's experiences. So I was wondering what you think that adds to the story, especially for a teen audience, having an adult's perspective like that.
I hope it adds like a layer of understanding and empathy for everyone who reads these two novels. For young people, I think it's a chance to see their parents as fully human as they are, and kind of puts their parents, or pulls them out of a box and kind of places them in context with them.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we're always coming of age, which is why I'm kind of drawn to like these coming of age stories. Because I feel,
Mm-hmm.
as I've grown up, I always feel like I'm about to become something else. Like I'm always changing into this different person, which I felt this way my entire life when I was, when I was in elementary school and then in middle school and then high school, I'm always on the precipice of becoming something different. And my life's always changing. Your body's always changing. You're always like on the edge of like, hey, this next stage of your life is coming. You have to be ready. And it's
Mhm.
always this unknown thing you're at the edge of. And I've always felt that way. And I like that never changes. And it doesn't change for a young person as you become a parent. That doesn't change. You're about to get married. That's something new. You have a kid. That's something new and changes. Your life is just constantly, there's always something unknown and scary right in front of you. So for young people, that's exactly where their parents are all the time. And to me, I want to write stories where the adult characters, while they're trying to teach their teenager, their middle schooler, they're trying to teach them things about the world while at the same time being completely afraid and nervous and unsure of what they're doing, what they're trying to teach, and having that same experience that the young person in their life is having. And to me, I think Fabi has that experience in Barely Missing Everything. And in the Brocarts, I wanted to write a childhood kind of experience for the Sarge and show how his upbringing mirrors Danny's upbringing, even though like their economics are different, the same
Mhm.
feelings and experiences of the unknown and dreaming of the future, those things are the same, even if their economic situations are different,
No,
if that
for
makes sense.
sure. And no, absolutely. And I think that's really incredible because even down to like Daniel, the Sarge, and Danny having the same name
Right.
is like creating that connection between them. And it was so easy to see how their childhoods were mirroring each other. And it gave the story a whole nother dimension that I think it would have really been missing out on if you hadn't included that. So I really, really loved that. Um, Kind of going off of what you were saying about that idea of continuously changing and of that continuity of our experiences. One of my favorite quotes from the Brocarts was, "The past never leaves you. In fact, the past happens over and over again." Um, and going along with that, the novel really, in a lot of ways, just felt like an exploration of grief and of going through that process and trying to live your life and continue to fight these obstacles at the same time. Um, so I kind of wanted to know how you went about approaching that process of grief for the different characters.
So the novel is definitely about being brokenhearted. So the
Mm-hmm.
novel begins with, the death of their best friend. Juan is tragically killed. He is killed by a police officer. It's kind of an infamous thing that's happened in their life, in their city. It has some notoriety. JD has witnessed it firsthand. It's traumatized him. He's also left his city. He's joined the Air Force. He's made this kind of rash decision. And he's this pretty brokenhearted person. But that's not the only heartbreak that he's feeling. That's not the only trauma he has. His parents have also divorced. So then that's a heartbreak. Danny's lost his best friend. And then he's also, graduated high school and moving on to college. And he's not really living the life that he wants to live. He's in conflict with his dad. His dad becomes sick. And I was writing it, it was right in 2020. It was during COVID. And, it's just this really kind of heartbreaking time that everybody's kind of experiencing. And as I'm writing, I'm beginning to realize we all kind of suffer these heartbreaks that you still have to live through. You're still navigating as you're trying to find joy, you're trying to find happiness, you're trying to just get through your day and live your life. And we all kind of endure these little heartbreaking moments in our lives, whether they're big or small. We're all kind of going through it. And I was
Mm-hmm.
writing, the boys are trying to navigate these worlds. And as a writer, I'm navigating this pain and heartbreak with them, and then my own heartbreak. And I realize that everybody is doing this all at the same time. And, love is what really gets these boys through this. Their friendship has, kind of moved in opposite directions. They're in different parts of their lives and they're wondering, can we still be friends? can we still have our families? What is this? What do our lives mean now that we're in such different places? The time after high school is scary. And now they're suffering heartbreak. It's like, what
Mhm.
does it mean to be close? What do our lives mean now? And to me, that's just a question I was asking. As I was writing, it's like, hey, we all have these heartbreaks that we're dealing with. What do we need the most? We need friends, we need family, we need love. And to me, that's kind of what the book is about, or in part what it's about is how do we live through heartbreak? What do we need? And these boys needed each other. They
Mhm.
needed their friendships. Danny needs his cousin. He needs Roxanne. He needs his mother. He needs his friends. That's what JD needs. And, those are the things that help us kind of navigate these heartbreaks, big and small.
Yeah, for sure. That just reminded me of one of my favorite parts of Barely Missing Everything too, when Fabi has that moment. I think it's when she's in the diner when she just realizes like everyone around her is just going about their lives and
Yeah.
probably experiencing their own problems too, and that's comforting in a way because the world just keeps turning, no matter what you're dealing with, and it's
I know
something I've
at first it feels like such a betrayal that everybody, how can you
yeah.
possibly be going on with your life when I'm in so much pain? And then it becomes comforting that no, everybody's
Mhm.
suffering and everybody's moving on. And then you can kind of grab onto them and they pull you along with them.
No, exactly. And I know I've felt that exact thing. So I
Absolutely,
really,
absolutely.
yeah, really related to that. And I love that. I love how you managed to portray that in both of the books. Um, you mentioned JD joining the Air Force, which is something I wanted to talk about a little bit as well, because I really enjoyed the way that you talked about military culture in the book and JD's experiences and how his life in the military is intersecting with his racial identity and his socioeconomic standing and his past and just all these things coming into play in a way that we haven't seen for him yet. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about maybe what informed your knowledge of that representation of his experience there.
Well, a lot of so JD joins the Air Force right out of high school,
Hmm.
not really knowing what else to do, knowing he wants to be a filmmaker and doesn't know how to get there. And that's an
Hmm.
experience that I had as
Yeah.
a young person. So I joined the Air Force right out of high school and was in a pretty similar situation to JD, where I joined and 6 months later I was deployed.
Mm.
So I have some pretty good firsthand experience to kind of what JD's whirlwind first 6 months out of high school was kind of like. And it's
Hmm.
pretty jarring to go from, worrying about, high school football games and basketball games and hanging with your friends. So all of a sudden being on the other side of the world in a kind of dangerous situation, you're like, oh, what did I do? You're
Mm.
kind of in a panic. And that's where JD is at. And then you come into a culture that's so much different than anything you've ever experienced. And there's people
Mm.
with different beliefs, different attitudes, different ways of behaving, and you're kind of in a culture that is completely dissimilar to everything or anything you've ever experienced. And he has to navigate that. And the military is kind of a microcosm of the country.
Yeah.
And he has to figure out what he's going to do, just much like I had to figure out what I was going to do in this world where he has zero support and zero friends, and there's nobody to call to go, help him. When you're at home and you kind of brush up against, microaggressions or outright racism or any kind of threat to physical violence, you have your friends or your family that you can kind of go and get safety from. But when you're isolated and by yourself in a brand new place, he has no one, so he's just kind of on alert all the time. And that's where JD was. And I remember very much having those kinds of experiences until you become comfortable and then get some confidence and learn how to navigate that world. And then you can kind of navigate that world and you find friends and you find that same kind of safety you had before because you find similar people to you, and then you're able to kind of negotiate that in a way where you have a support system. But he's in the beginning stages where he doesn't have that support system, much like Danny in college. It's the same kind of newness where he doesn't have that support system and he's completely out of sorts as well. I wanted to show both characters in a place where they're completely out of sorts and they're trying to navigate these new worlds that don't that aren't necessarily built for boys like them.
Yeah, for sure. I really like how you parallel their experiences because even though they're so different in a lot of ways, ultimately that newness and the newness of the environment and of being without support in that way is very, very similar. And it really made me feel for them, especially as someone who is in college
For
and
sure. And they're not
as
prepared for it. And both of them act out in ways that aren't going to help them, especially
oh
Danny in
yeah,
this
which
classroom. Yeah.
is yeah, yeah, no, for sure. And yeah, it was really relatable, even if I haven't, experienced every facet of what they're experiencing. Still, it was I felt for them very much in those ways. Um, Looking more at Danny's journey in the novel, the use of the loteria cards in his uh, journey towards understanding his art and his relationship with it was something I found really, really emotional in a lot of ways, especially because Fabi was the one who gave them to him. And I was wondering how you went about deciding how to adapt the use of the loteria cards to Danny's experience with like La Muerte being a police officer or JD as El Borracho. Like those were personal adaptations of the cards. So I just wanted to hear more about your thoughts of using the cards to represent Danny's experience in that way.
So, so Danny's an artist. He wants to, he loves art, becomes a muralist in the story. Not that I'm giving too much away, but
Yeah.
he that's how he communicates best is through visual arts and in creating. And to me, the Loteria cards have always been, well, first of all, it's a game. It's, it's the kind of like
Mm-hmm.
bingo. It's a game of chance. So to
Mm-hmm.
me, that the element of chance, the idea of randomness has always been like an idea that I like to play with in my stories. Idea of like these set of circumstances happen, these chance things happen, and then what do characters decide to do after these situations have presented themselves, and then the character makes a choice, and then all sorts of third and fourth order effects happen. So I
Mm-hmm.
love playing with that just in my writing. And that's kind of how a Loteria game is, kind of like bingo, where these random things just happen, or the way the game is laid out. It's just pretty random, like bingo. But then the cards themselves, they're just iconic, and they're like these beautiful cards. And I've
Mm-hmm.
always been fascinated by the art of the cards, and they kind of have like a tarot card kind of artistry to them and almost symbolic meaning to them. So for me, when I was writing, I thought, oh, these kind of cards, both the way the game is played and then kind of the symbolic kind of look to the cards kind of fit for me as far as what I wanted to do and how Danny would use them to represent a story for how he was going to make meaning of his life, of Juan's life, and how he was going to kind of tell the story and kind of make peace with where his life is and what it's meant to him. So I picked some of the different cards in there because to me they were just symbolic of where Danny was, and it was going to give him the opportunity to use his culture, the rules of the game, and some of the symbolism of those cards to do that.
Really, really cool. The elements of it being like game like bingo and that surprise element and not knowing what's coming is really interesting and something I hadn't really considered. So I think that's really, really cool. Looking at the some of the craft elements that you used in this novel, again, I don't want to give too much away, but you do use some different modes of, I guess there's certain moments when the novel uh, slips into the form of a script, like a movie script. And
Mm-hmm.
same with it, really missing everything. You use like a test, right? Like
Yeah,
Juan's
there's a math
test.
test in there. That's
Yeah,
right.
his math test, but they're describing like his thoughts and his emotional state and his experiences. And that as a writer myself, it was so cool to see that sort of those unconventional methods. How did you decide like what parts of the story or what parts of the characters should be represented in those various ways, and what did that add to your ability to express those things?
So I love kind of taking those little flights of fancies when I'm writing and
Mm-hmm.
have like the character. So I love writing in third person past tense because to me it's like a nice solid base to write in. And for me, that allows me to then switch gears and kind of take some more experimental chances when I'm writing. So JD wants to be a filmmaker. That's what he's in the Air Force for. So he can pay for it. He can get the GI Bill and pay for his college. And really, what he wants to do is make movies. So when I'm writing for JD, I make sure I pay attention to landscape and the writing becomes more cinematic when I'm writing for JD. And then naturally kind of slip into scene writing and screenplay. And that's how Danny starts, or that's how JD, excuse me, starts to think. And like you, in his point of view, I naturally try to slip in there because that's how JD is seeing the world. That's how he wants to see the world. That's how he wants to create art and make meaning, much like Danny as a muralist when he's mixing paints and when he's painting. It takes on a, I try to write the third person much closer with an aesthetic point of view and much more, write much more about colors and details. When I'm writing with JD, it's much more about language and dialogue. And I try to be very conscious of how I write those point of views to kind of mirror the two aesthetics and the two art forms that the two boys are most interested in. And that allowed me to slip into screenplay writing and a little, get a little creative and take a little bit more risks when I'm writing with JD and write some of his point of view and screenplay,
Yeah,
which is
that's
pretty fun. I
well,
got away with writing a whole short film screenplay in there, which I was pretty excited about.
oh, you did, and I loved it so much. Those are some of my favorite moments. Just I think I know I did, and I think we can all learn a lot from how you integrated that and how you used those artistic um, inclinations from both of them to inform how you approach their point of view. That's a really incredible attention to detail and something that I would love to be able to develop in my own writing. So that was
Oh,
really,
that's
really cool
cool.
to see. Yeah, and you did it so well.
Well,
So
thank you.
I loved reading that. Yeah. Um, all right. So my final question for you today is if you have any future plans that you can maybe share with us.
Well, I'm working on a third novel. It's in work now. I'm hard to work on it. I don't want to give too much away, but it's a little bit of a departure. It's a ghost story.
Okay.
So normally I write pretty literary contemporary fiction. Everything's kind of in the real world, and this one is the mix of the real world, but it kind of we venture off into a little bit of the supernatural. So I'm working on that. Uh, it'll be again a multiple point of view story. So I love alternating points of view in books. I just think it's
Yeah,
fun.
me
I
too.
enjoy writing those. So it'll be kind of like that. And yeah, that's what's currently writing wise. That's what I'm doing.
Amazing. Well, I will definitely pick that one up when it hits the shelves for sure. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, thank
I'm
you
so
for having me.
excited that, yeah, I'm really, really excited that we're going to be helping you with this book launch too. That's when I found out. I was like, that's a really cool thing that we get to do. And thank you for choosing to have it with us.
Oh, I could not think of a better
Um,
place to launch the Brocars with WoW and with Pines. I'm super excited.
Yeah, me too. Can't wait. So yeah, the Bro Cards comes out next month. We will be posting this interview shortly, and we also have a review coming as well. So thank you so much for watching, and thank you, Matt, again for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Reese. Thank you.